So now let's start talking about how you can learn how to love yourself. What are some of the practical things that you can do to start loving yourself? Well, I want to start with letting you know that self-love is a skill. It's something that you can develop. You can develop it as a habit and a lifestyle. You see, here's the thing. Self-love is often misunderstood as a natural trait that some people simply have and others don't. But that's not the truth. Self-love is not an inherent personality trait. It is a skill that can be learned, practiced, and strengthened over time. It's like any other skill. If you're trying to learn a language, you got to practice it. If you've got to, figure out how to play an instrument, you got to practice it. Self-love is the same thing. And over time, with repetition and reinforcement, it can become a natural and automatic part of your life. Now, before I move on any further, I want to take a moment and I want to say this to you. There is nothing wrong with you. If you struggle to love yourself, and if you're beating yourself up for not being able to love yourself, and you think there's something wrong with you because you don't like yourself and you have low self-esteem or whatever the story is, I'm going to say it to you again. There's nothing wrong with you. You can develop the skill of self-love. And all the ways that you feel about yourself are a lot about what we talked about earlier. Those experiences that sent us the message that there's something wrong with us, that block us from our own love. Listen, nothing wrong with you. There's no shame in it, and you can learn how to love yourself. Now, if you need support on your journey of learning how to have a healthy relationship with yourself by practicing things like self-compassion and self-love, I want to encourage you to set up a complimentary coaching call where we'll spend 60 minutes together, getting to know each other and see if working together is a right fit. You can set up that free call by going to my website at jerryhenderson.org, or you can see the resource section in this course. There'll be a link there. So if you're ready to transform your relationship with yourself, transform the relationships in your life, and ultimately transform your life, then set up that free call. Because the truth is, no matter what you're going through, you don't have to go through it alone. You can overcome the burnout that you might have experienced. You can get off of the achievement treadmill. You can learn to love and accept yourself as you are. You can have healthy, life-giving relationships. And here's the truth. You're worthy of those things in your life. And part of understanding that we're worthy is letting go of those limiting beliefs, rewiring ourselves, and then having support for the journey. So once again, go to my website or see the resource section and set up your free discovery call. I'm looking forward to hearing about your goals. And most importantly, I'm looking forward to getting to know you. So now let's talk about developing self-love. I want you to understand something about our brains. Our brains have the capacity to change. We can change the way that our brain is wired. Neuroplasticity, or the ability for the brain to adapt and change, means that we can form new neural pathways through repeated thoughts and behaviors. When we consistently engage in self-loving thoughts, actions, words, etc., we are strengthening our neural connections associated with positive regard, making self-love feel more natural over time. I think that is such great news. Because listen, the habit that you have right now of criticizing yourself, beating yourself up, not loving yourself, feeling like there's something wrong with you, it's exactly that. It's a habit that got wired in your brain through time, through repetition, through you being in there telling yourself that story over and over. The good news is, as we begin to let go of that story by choosing, this is really important, by choosing a new story about ourselves, repeating that story, it's now putting new grooves into our brains, new pathways that are going to feel more accessible and more natural to you over time. And what once felt very familiar to you, self-hatred, self-loathing, is going to start to feel foreign to you as you now begin to connect with something that once felt unfamiliar to you, loving yourself, that now is going to start to feel very familiar to you. The brain, we want to say thank you to it for its ability to change through repetition and through intentionality. Now, let's talk about some research-backed strategies for cultivating self-love. Self-love can be nurtured through intentional practices that focus on how we think about ourselves, our thoughts, how we speak to ourselves, our words, how we see our worth and value, the visualization, engaging in daily behaviors or those actions, and then building supportive connections or supportive relationships. All of these are critical to shaping a more healthy relationship with ourselves, which can then lead to a healthier self-concept, and then it will foster long-term well-being as we learn to practice these things as ways to show ourselves that we're learning to love ourselves. So how do we start learning to love ourselves? Through our thoughts, through our words, through visualization, through actions, and through relationships. All right, so let's dive into the first one, our thoughts. So let's talk about self-loving thoughts and reframing negative beliefs and cultivating self-compassion towards ourselves. So let's talk about thought reframing for self-love. Cognitive behavioral therapy highlights the importance of identifying and challenging our negative core beliefs to foster healthier self-perceptions. Research is clear on this, that we can disrupt our thoughts, choose new thoughts. And so reframing distorted thoughts like I'm not good enough into more balanced perspectives, such as I'm doing my best, that's enough, that's going to help reduce self-criticism. And you have the power to do this. You might think that you can't change the way that you think. You can. You just have a habit and a pattern of it, and you can learn how to change that. And part of it is this reframing process, interrupting it, choosing a new thought, and then repeating that new thought to ourselves. All right, let's start talking about how self-compassion can reduce that internal criticism and help reduce our psychological distress and can actually open us up to accessing self-love. Now, the research by Dr. Kristen Neff shows that treating oneself with kindness and understanding during difficult times reduces anxiety, depression, and perfectionism. She shares how self-compassion involves mindfulness, the ability to observe what's going on with us without judgment, and then allowing self-kindness to happen, and then the recognition that our struggles are a shared part of humanity. And just because we have struggles doesn't mean there's something wrong with us, okay? To acknowledge the fact that imperfection is a part of humanity and is a part of being human is a big part of practicing self-compassion. Now, research also shows that practicing self-compassion can actually change the way that the brain functions. It reduces activity in the amygdala, that fight or flight that we have, the fear and anxiety. It can help settle that down. And it also, at the same time, increases activation in areas linked to emotional regulation and well-being, our prefrontal cortex, right? It shifts activity from the amygdala, fight or flight, to calm, reason, up into the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to manage stress better, to see clearly, and to allow ourselves to relax and to relax in our own presence. Now, with all of that in mind, let's talk about some practical ways that we can apply this. Number one, practice thought-stopping techniques to interrupt those negative self-talk habits that you have and replace it with more compassionate thoughts or mantras. What's a mantra? It's basically a phrase that you're going to choose, that you're going to have, that you're going to replace that negative thought with, that you're going to say over and over and over in your mind. So, for example, your mantra might be, I'm worthy of love. Your mantra might be, I'm worthy of my own love. Your mantra might be, I love myself. Whatever it is, choose it, have it ready, so when the negative thought comes, you disrupt it, and then you replace it with the mantra. Another thing that you can do is use self-compassionate language when you're reflecting on your mistakes, either present or past, and say things like, it's okay to struggle. I'm still learning. And that language shift is actually going to have an energy shift inside of your system, and you'll begin to notice it. You'll begin to relax toward yourself as you give yourself compassion. Now, the other thing I want to touch on in this space is for you to recognize You're not your thoughts. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Think about it. You have all kinds of thoughts. One day you're thinking that everything's going to work out. The next day you're thinking everything's going to fall apart. You can't always trust your thoughts. Don't believe everything that you think. And the ability to detach from our thoughts and observe them and not see them as us and not see them as truth is really important in learning how to practice self-love. All right, let's move on to words. Words are very important. And the research shows us that if we can use positive self-talk, it's going to enhance our overall well-being. So, research also shows that engaging in self-talk that's positive can significantly reduce stress, as we've talked about before, right? You might have a waterline of stress that's really high, and I do this work with my clients, where they come in, they've got this really high waterline of stress, and they're really struggling on how to manage things. And one of the first things that we start to do is examine how they're talking towards themselves. Are they catastrophizing? Are they telling themselves that, they're no good, they're going to fail? You see, all that internal conflict that you're having is wrecking your nervous system, and it's causing your stress waterline to stay pretty high. And so the smallest thing that comes your way floods it up over your head. And one of the things that I often work with people on is getting that waterline to become lower. And one of the first places that we can start, low-hanging fruit, is changing the way that you talk to yourself. And as you become more gentle with yourself, more loving towards yourself, you're able to relax in your presence more. You're increasing your capacity for other stressors. You're building your resilience. And before you know it, you've got a greater sense of ease and peace because you're self-accepting. You're loving towards yourself through the practice of kind words, kind talk. You're getting out of fight or flight against yourself. You're not having to be on guard against you. And that's an important part of lowering your stress, is changing the way that you talk to yourself up here and also the words that come out of your mouth. Because when you say something, you're activating multiple parts of your system. You're thinking it, you're saying it, you're hearing it. It's all wiring together. So if you want to reduce that stress, you can start by changing the words that you say about yourself. Now, the interesting thing, research also shows that people who practiced affirming statements actually experienced lower levels of cortisol, that stress hormone, and it improved their ability to emotionally regulate. Now, let's talk about the science of affirmations, because it is a science. It's not just woohoo. Affirmations work by activating the brain's reward centers, particularly the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is associated with self-related processing and valuation. That system is an important part of how we're relating to ourselves and the valuation that we're placing on ourselves and other things. So really important to understand that those affirmations aren't just words. They're activating parts of your brain that are making a connection with rewards, with self-processing, and valuation. And this activation helps reinforce positive self-views, making self-love more accessible. You're actually opening yourself to yourself by the way that you treat yourself when you decide to be more loving in the words that you speak towards yourself. Now, let's talk about some practical application for this. Number one, use daily affirmations such as I'm worthy of love and respect. I accept myself as I am. And here's what I want to encourage you. Practice those when you're in a good state so that you're building the muscle of them, okay? Because we want to have them ready for when we're trying to replace negative self-talk with neutral or, better yet, positive statements. For example, instead of saying I'm a failure, reframe it as I'm learning and growing from this experience. So there's a couple of things happening here. One, we're practicing the affirmations so that when the bad times do come, we have them ready. And then also, our system is getting more used to those affirmations, and they're easier for us to say out of our mouth. Hearing ourselves say those good things about us is becoming more comfortable for us, so that when we do get into the negative thinking or negative self-talk, we have something that we already know that we can go to replace it with.